Are you seeing the correct screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to talk about the FLIP program a little bit today. I've pulled up the PowerPoint presentation that we usually go through with labs when we're doing a kickoff call with them. I'm just going to go through some of these pretty quickly, but basically the FLIP project stands for the Public Health Laboratory Informatics Project. It was initially started, gosh, it's been a while, 2006. Is that right, Ricky? I can't remember.
2006, yes.
Okay. And initially, the project was to get influenza results from public health labs over to the CDC flu program. The scope of the project has expanded a bit, and so now, in addition to influenza results, we also receive respiratory and enteric pathogens that are used by the NERVS team for their surveillance data. And in addition, we also are receiving Mpox results through FLIP as well. So I kind of see FLIP as it's a project that's been established for quite some time. Most of the PHLs are sending through FLIP, and so whenever there are new pathogens that CUC is interested in, FLIP tends to be a feed that they consider using to get those results through, just because it's working, it's established, and labs know how to add new pathogens into the FLIP feed, which was the case for Mpox when that happened. So right now we receive a number of message formats. We are encouraging all of the labs to move up to 251 messages, but FLIP can receive 251 messages, 231 messages, and then way back when, before there was HL7 messages, labs were sending what we call Phyllis 2 files. And so this was the CSV format that labs were sending to CDC. There are only a handful of labs left that are still sending Phyllis 2 files, but our goal is to move those who are sending Phyllis 2 files and those who are sending 231 files and upgrading them to 251. I'm not going to go about over 251 since we all know why we need to upgrade, but here are some numbers with regards to where FLIP is currently at. We have a number of FLIP senders. As you can see, we still have a few 231 senders that we're trying to migrate and upgrade to 251. We have about 43 that are in full production, 4 that are in parallel, and I'll talk about what that means later on. For those that we're actively working on, we have 10, and then there are 5 in the queue, meaning they are ready to work with 251, but just not quite right now due to other competing priorities. So in terms of the TA process, I think it's pretty similar to other APHL programs, but after the kickoff call, we usually have a vocab call, and at that point, we ask them to go through send me a list of all their local codes for their orders or test results, specimen types, and if they've mapped to standard codes, to send those to me as well. I take a look and make sure that those are all mapped correctly per the FLIP encoding guidelines. So I'll show you the FLIP encoding guidelines after, but it's essentially the FLIP Bible, if you will. So every code that is possible is included in FLIP encoding guidelines. If it's a code that's not in there and the labs want to add them in, then we go through the whole change request process and go through CCB to get that approved. As part of the kickoff call, I forgot to mention that we do have CDC teams on that call, and the purpose of that is for the labs to talk through their testing algorithm, and so that CDC is aware of what labs do if they receive a particular specimen and the workflow that they go through, so that when CDC does receive the messages later on, the workflow makes sense to them. So once we've reviewed the vocab, and they've made any necessary changes on their LAMPs or interface engine side. Then we ask them to send a couple of test messages over, and the goal of that is just to make sure that they've built the HL7 messages to the FLIP specs. If there are any structural issues that are identified, we work with them to get that fixed. Once the message is built structurally correctly, then we start moving on to their full test suite. And so, as part of the vocab call earlier, we also have a list of all the possible test scenarios that labs could send, and we go through that spreadsheet and identify the ones that are relevant to the lab. So each lab's test suite varies. Some only have 10 to 15, and others, like one I did recently, had up to 90 messages. And so it depends on their test directory, which ones they're running and which ones they're sending through FLIP. So through the validation process, we'll work with the labs on each of the test scenarios, depending on how many they have to go through. And once they finish that, then they are finished with TA validation. We then ask them to send the same set of past messages through the staging environment to CDC so that CDC can do their validation. Once CDC approves, then they're allowed to migrate to production. For those who are able to continue sending their 231 feeds, we ask them to send both 231 and 251 in parallel so that CDC can do additional validation after they're moved into production to confirm that everything that they had previously sent in 231 are also coming in their 251 messages. Once CDC has done their final validation, then the labs will be in what we call full production, meaning they can turn off any of their legacy feeds and only send 251 at that point. So here's a schedule that we usually send to the labs. I will say I don't think I've ever worked with a lab that's able to finish in 12 weeks. So this is a very ambitious timeline when all the resources are available to work on the project. But we try, just don't quite always reach that goal. Okay, so I think that was the end of this presentation. The one thing I will add is that unlike some of the 8 other APHL programs, FLIP is unique in the sense that we don't work with cohorts for validation. And so we are working on a number of labs at the same time, and they're all in different phases of this TA process, which does make it a little challenging at times. And so I kind of see FLIP falling into 3 main buckets in terms of the TA support that we provide. One is for those who are upgrading to 251, which would be a full validation process. Those who are changing limbs and also go through a full validation process. They may be sending 251 already, but if they're changing them, then we start at the very beginning and go through everything with them again. And then lastly, kind of the one-offs is what I call them. So if labs are adding any new tests, then we work with them to make sure that those tests are built correctly and have a much smaller validation process for those assays or changes to their assays. So I will show you our Confluence page right now. So this is a Confluence page, and we have a lot of resources on here for the labs. In addition, this is where we house all of the documents that we share with the labs. And so previously we were sending spreadsheets back and forth, and that just got complicated with version control. And so all the labs that we're currently working with, they have their own sites and it's locked down for that particular site. And so any of the documents that we have or anything specific for that lab, meeting minutes, whatnot, it's all here. And so this is the go-to place for all the sites that we work with in order to access the documents that we are working on with them. trying to see if there's anything else to show here. Yeah, there's a tab for jurisdiction resources. And so in terms of vocabulary, these are the three main documents that we use. So we have the FLIP message specs template here. And so this is essentially the FLIP implementation guide. It has all the different segments and fields, additional information as to how to build it out in their limbs. And then for labs that were previously sending 231, there's some additional comments here as to whether or not it's the same field in 231 or if it has changed. For FLIP, we also have the EPI questions or the AOE questions. And so we have a number of these listed here. These aren't required, but for the labs are not required to send these, but if they do capture these AOE questions in their limbs and are able to send them through FLIP, that's CCS that they do. And so we have a number of questions here, and from the pandemic, all the HHS questions that were asked for COVID are also listed here. And so I think at this point, very few labs actually collect this information now, but if they do, then we work with them to make sure that they're mapped correctly in their messages.
I think the one question that was required if you're 231 is the specimen ID, right?
Yes, yeah. So specimen ID is still required for 231. Yep. Then the other document is our FLIP encoding guidelines. Let me pull that up quickly. So this is the document we send to labs with essentially all of the codes that is acceptable through FLIP. And so as you can see, we have a lot, and we're still adding to it depending on the labs that we're working with. But this is the the table, the spreadsheet that we send for the lab so they can do their mapping by themselves. And if they are having trouble, then they will reach out to us and we can help with any of their mapping needs. And then the last spreadsheet here is the test scenario validation spreadsheet that I was talking about before. So we've broken it up into the main pathogens that you can send through FLIP, and you can see there are a number of test scenarios for influenza. And then if they have any RVPs or respiratory virus panels that we're running, let me go through that. There are a few different main commercial assays that are listed here. If they run any cultures on respiratory pathogens, those are listed as well. And then for nerves, we've listed the main pathogens as well. COVID is not specifically listed here just because there are so many different commercial assays out there. And so once we go through our kickoff call and we understand their testing algorithm, then that's when I pull in the specific COVID assays that they could be running and populate the spreadsheet with that information. So this spreadsheet is also the spreadsheet that we use during the validation process. And so every message that they send to us, I pull it over here. So I have a running list of all the messages that were sent. I identify the errors for each. And so we can kind of keep track to see what are the errors that still haven't been resolved yet, which ones still need to be resolved, etc. So this is kind of the main spreadsheet that we use for validation. Let's see. Go back. Yeah, I think that's it. That's all that I wanted to talk through today. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Hey, Amy, this is Grace. I have a question.
Sure.
Are all like all, I guess, state public health labs already um, I guess connected, have like an existing feed to CDC, or are there still some that I guess are onboarding?
So I would say not all the state public health labs have a flip fee. Majority of them do. I think there are only a few handful that don't right now. And then in addition, we are working with other PHLs that want to send a flip data. So for example, San Francisco, we're working with them right now, and they would be a new flip reporter. And then same with LA County eventually. We'll work with them to get them onboarded to flip.
Okay.
Any other questions?
You want to talk a little bit about the change control board?
Sure, yeah. Thank you. That was one thing I was going to bring up and I forgot. So this is our change request log, and it's for Flip, Rabies, and VPD, this log. And so whenever there are any change requests from labs, then I enter the ones for Flip and VPD into this log here. So specifically identifying what are the new codes that needs to be added for either orders, tests, or results, any new code combinations, or if there are new value sets that we need to create. For example, for Mpox, we need to create new value sets, or for COVID, new value sets need to be created for that. So once it's entered into the log, we wait on a quarterly basis. And then at that point, we have our CCB call. We try to have a CCB call in person once a year. All the other ones are through email, but we compile all the CRs that have been created during that quarter. We send it out to CDC first to get their review and approval to make sure that what we're requesting is fine with them and it works for their program needs. Once CDC gives their approval, then we send it out to the Flip community. And so the Flip community will vote on it. Most of the time, we don't get a lot of votes back from labs. And so the understanding is that if we don't hear any nays, then we will assume that the CR pass. And so at that point, then we will go into the Flip database and make the necessary changes so that the Flip encoding guideline is also updated at that point with the new CRs. And then the other thing I forgot to mention was for validation, I do use the GBT tool for Flip. And so whenever there are new CRs that are approved, the Flip encoding guidelines gets updated. And then we also create new spreadsheets that we then send to Caroline to update the tables behind the scenes for the GBT tool. And so those CRs also reflected when we use the GBT tool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Anything else?